So if we were looking today, we're going to start our genetic crosses. We had made some attempt at starting them just before we finished up, but we're going to really get into the detail of them today. So what we're really looking at is how we inherit our traits and how we can track back how traits are inherited as well. So we're going to be taking a really close look at why some people have brown eyes, why others have blue, maybe whether you have earlobes or not. Why people have brown hair, others have blonde, some people have straight hair, other people have curly or wavy hair. And I suppose I'm very conscious within this chapter that we're really looking at new terms. So I've laid my work out almost as a grid again, except I've put keywords in. So we're going to be looking at gene, allele, gamete, homozygous, heterozygous, dominant, recessive, phenotype, genotype, offspring produced in the F1 generation, and the idea of male and female as well. So lots of new language about what we're learning today throughout the... So boys, I'd really like you to understand that when we're doing genetic crosses, that we're really speaking about probability. What are the chances of having offspring with particular traits we'll be talking about? You can see in this container I have 4 different Lego heads, and 2 of them are red and 2 of them are yellow. So if I was referring back, my gene that I'm looking at is Lego head color, and then my alleles, my alternative forms of those genes is they either have red heads or they have yellow heads. So we're focusing again on the idea that this whole genetic crosses, that they're all about probability. So let's look at this very simple example. Okay, so we've got a male and his 2 alleles he got from his parents are both yellow. And the female, the 2 alleles she got from her parents are both red. So we're wondering what type of gametes could they form? And if we were looking at that seriously, the only type of gamete that the male could give would be a sperm that would always carry that gene for a yellow Lego head. And the only type of gamete the female could make is an egg that always would have that allele for having a red red Lego head. So if we look at the possible offspring that they could form, they're both giving either of the gametes, but I'm saying that the yellow Lego head is dominant. So their offspring is going to be yellow, although they're carrying a hidden allele for red. So there's only one possible outcome that we could ever have from these 2 mating. So that's just a very simple example. But if we go back to probability, I'm looking at what mixtures could I make from this simple sample space that you do in maths. And the only mixture I can make is yellow with a red. So I can make one type of mixture. Let's look at another example. So I've changed it up a little bit, just a simple example of a sample space. So we have a little bit of variance here. So we still have the male, and the only thing that he can contribute here is a yellow allele. And the female, now some of her eggs, 50% of her eggs will contain yellow. So these might go together. But 50% of her eggs will also carry a red. So if this sperm got together with this red, we would have a different combination. But if we went back to what I said earlier, what would they look like? Their genes that they're carrying might be different, but we're still going to have an offspring with a yellow head. And because yellow's dominant, we're still going to have an offspring with a yellow head. But we had 2 different types of, we call them genotypes formed. But just back to the simple idea again that we had different pairings. So boys, let me introduce you to our 2 little monster people we're always going to be discussing when we're doing genetic crosses. So here is Larry, and you can see that he's the male from the way that I've drawn him, and you can also see the symbol that we use for males in genetics. And here we have Mary, and you can see from her little pink dress and that I have her little symbol for a female as well. So we're often going to be talking about Larry and Mary when we're discussing anything to do with genetics. If we're looking about Larry and Mary, the first thing I'm going to be looking at is the shape of their eyes. So we're going to say that our gene is eye shape. So they're either going to have square eyes or round eyes. And as we're looking at the moment, what Larry is expressing, or what his phenotype, what he physically looks like, he has got square eyes, and Mary, her phenotype is that she has round eyes. So I'm going back again to, I would call their gene eye shape, but then I have their two alleles. So their alleles are square eyes and round eyes. And we mentioned that an allele is an alternate form of the same gene. So if we're going back to the idea of filling in our grid as we go, so just familiar with the idea that a gene, I've drawn a gene here on a chromosome. So we know a chromosome is quite a long strand of DNA, and I've got one gene showing here on this particular chromosome, but we know there'll be many more genes on a chromosome, and that it's a small section of DNA that codes for a protein. And in my example of the monsters, it's coding for the shape of their eye, but it might be coding for brown hair, blonde hair, it might be coding for brown eyes, blue eyes, it might be coding for somebody to be tall, another person to be shorter. And then just the idea of an allele, that it's an alternate form of a gene. So square eyes and round eyes are the other examples I just mentioned. I'm just mentioning here the idea of a gamete, and that it's a sex cell and it's capable of fusion. So we'll be talking about fertilization a lot, that the sex cells are fusing with each other, they're joining with each other. And I just put in a quick reminder of our sperm cell that has three parts, that has a head, a collar full of mitochondria. The head had the nucleus with the 23 chromosomes for us in it, and then the tail helped it swim. And here I have the egg as well. And I'm just mentioning for you, just for you to recap as well, that the nucleus has 23 chromosomes in a human. So the idea that we're sticking to that haploid number of 23. So just three kind of notes that we've discussed so far. Okay, so once again, we're back to Larry and Mary, our two little monsters, and we were discussing that we were talking about their gene being the eye shape, and we were talking about them whether they had square or round alleles inside in their cells, going to dictate what they were going to have. And we're going to talk about the alleles, and I'm going to just mention that for our example today, that square is going to be dominant to round. So we had mentioned earlier on, just in case you've forgotten, that the dominant gene, we use its first letter. So we're going to use a big S, a capital S for the idea of squared. And for round, then we're just going to use a small s. And I'm going to make my S very obvious that I'm using a small s rather than a large S. So I'm going to use my joint writing for the lowercase s, because square was dominant to round. Other words that we've discussed as well before we finished up was the idea of something being homozygous dominant. Now, we mentioned with the word homozygous, we mentioned that it meant the same, that they would have the same alleles. So if it's homozygous dominant, it means that it's carrying its two alleles or two capital S's. I've given a little crown, just the idea of dominant. It's almost like the king. And homozygous recessive, so we've just mentioned that homozygous meant the same, so the alleles will have to be the same. And we've mentioned the idea of recessive. I've given it just like a little bow, like a servant kind of waiter. The idea that that will only be expressed, we'll only see it if it's with its own. So I'm going to give homozygous recessive two small s's. So that's the only way we're going to see the round eyes. And then our other term that we have is heterozygous, and we're familiar with the idea that hetero means different. And in this case, it means different alleles. So I'm going to give it a big S, and I'm also going to give it a small s. So it's two different alleles in this. So I'm just going to recap again from what we're doing. So homozygous means dominant, means two large s's. Homozygous recessive means the same, but it's two small s's. And heterozygous means different, so it's a big S and a small s. So boys, all the time going back to our grid to add our definitions, because this chapter is very much new language for us. So for homozygous, I'm going back to say the alleles are the same, and I'm going to give an example as I say the alleles are the same. So I'm going to say example, and I'm going to give it 2 capital S's. I'm just going to give it the same alleles. And for heterozygous, I'm mentioning that the alleles are different. So I'm going to give my example on that as well. So my different alleles are a big S and a small s. So I have a big S and a small s. I've mentioned dominant. So it's always expressed. You always see that in the trait, in the heterozygous condition. And then for recessive, that it's only expressed in the homozygous recessive condition. So it's going to be masked by the dominant allele all the time. And the idea that recessive gets a lowercase letter and that a dominant gets a higher case letter as well. And just 2 other definitions that are words or terms that we should be familiar with before we even start looking at a cross. So one of those would be your phenotype. We've mentioned this a little bit already. So your phenotype is what you physically look like. So what does the organism look like? A simple definition would be your physical appearance. So our example in our monster would be the idea that it has square eyes or round eyes. That's what it physically looks like. Or in this example here, the person has brown hair, or it's curly, or it's blonde, or it's straight. What do they physically look like? And I'm just mentioning that 2 things kind of influence that. So the example, obviously the genes that you carry from your mom and dad will influence what you physically look like. But then you might have somebody that might decide to dye their hair. So they might be born with blonde hair, but they are brown hair and they dye it blonde, or vice versa. Or you might have curly hair and you straighten it. So your environment does affect what you look like. Or another example might be you might be born to have maybe sallow or darker skin, but you're never out in the sun, so you don't produce enough of the protein to make your skin that little bit darker. Or an example here might be another term that we're looking at here is your genetic makeup, and you don't see that. You don't know what someone's genetic makeup really is. You could guess at it. So your genotype is your genetic makeup. So nice little easy definition there as well. And in our examples, the genetic makeup could be kind of 3 variants. We mentioned that it could be 2 big S's. We called that homozygous dominant. Or it could be a big S and a small s. We said that was heterozygous condition. And then here we have 2 small s's as well. So that was homozygous recessive. So your genotype is your genetic makeup, whereas your phenotype is what you physically look like. And here, the idea of offspring might be babies, they might be seeds. It depends what we're looking at and studying. And you'll see me write F1 a lot. So F1 is the first generation. So it will be the first offspring that mom and dad had, or that male and female had. Okay, so we have a lot of terms that we're mentioning now, but we're going to get used to in the next few minutes using those terms in a question and see how we feel about them. So let's look at a very simple question you could be asked. We're going to start with the easy one. So it says a true breed square-eyed monster. Now straight away I'm looking at true breed going, what does that mean? So sometimes we use everyday English words and link them to our biological type words. So true breed means it's homozygous. It has the same alleles. So we have a true breed square-eyed monster, and it's reproducing or crossing with a round-eyed monster. And it's telling us, like I've mentioned already, that square eye is dominant to round eye. And then it's saying, show by diagrams the phenotype and the genotype of the first generation. Okay, so lots of new words there. True breed means homozygous to us. We have a square-eyed monster with a round-eyed monster. And they're asking us to show by diagram. So we have to look and see what that actually means.